This is my presentation about the Navajo Code Talkers and the National Navajo Code Talkers Day for my Global Awareness passage. The table of content in this video will be history about the Native Americans or indigenous people, the Navajo Code Talkers part in World War II, what happened after the war, why we should care, and my part in trying to get the National Navajo Code Talkers Day on the national calendar. Natives or indigenous people were made into slaves back then, and they were treated horribly. The white settlers gave Pocahontas' father, Juan Sonuk, a crown and called him king, and convinced him that he should make his people work to supply the white settlers. They said he was more English than Native American or indigenous because he had sided more with the English than his own people. Native Americans or indigenous people were all forced onto reservations long ago because they had always fought to defend themselves, and anyone who had threatened them or their homeland, culture, or their family was their enemy. However, they were caring people, always trying to help out anyone in need, during any time of difficulty, including even laying down their lives for their people. Before Christopher Columbus, the Anglo-Saxons, the Spaniards, and everyone else, the Native Americans populated the land known as the United States, and there were about 500 different Native American languages. The first attack was by Christopher Columbus and the Spaniards, fighting the Native Americans or indigenous people for the land and killing them. They believed that the natives were savages and they had to become civilized. After Christopher Columbus, Spanish settlers went to Mexico and migrated towards what would later become known as the southwestern part of the United States. Many more settlers after that continued to come, then later forcing their religion of Christianity upon the natives as well as their languages. If the natives did not speak their languages or had their religion, they became savages and uncivilized, which then the settlers brought upon themselves to make them civilized and sent the children to boarding schools. The Native American children were forced to attend government-operated or church-operated boarding schools, and they were not allowed to speak their native tongue. If they did, they were beaten or their mouths were washed out with soap. After a while, the Native Americans or indigenous people had no choice in sending their children to the boarding schools because no other schooling was available for them. The whole point of the boarding schools was to eliminate their traditional ways of life and replace them with their American culture. They were forced to cut their hair and give up their clothing for the traditional clothing. They were not allowed to see their families for 4 or more years, and they were forced to give up their Native American names for English ones. Their religious practices were forcibly replaced by Christianity, and they were taught that their cultures were inferior. Their teachers made fun of their cultures and their ways, making the kids ashamed to be Native American. The boarding schools had a bad effect on the self-esteem of Indian students and on the well-being of native languages and cultures. However, not all boarding school memories were bad, and the natives had made friends for life, as well as skills that they would find helpful and use later on in life, like carpentry, cooking, science, math, agriculture, and trading. The boarding school life was like that of military life. They had to wear uniforms and march in formations. The Navajo Code Talkers part in World War II. During not only World War II, but World War I as well, Native American languages were used to send secret military messages that many people do not know about. In World War I, the languages that were used were Cherokee, Cheyenne, Choctaw, Comanche, Osage, and Yankton Sioux, transmitting messages by telephone, and that helped play a key role in the war, helping the U.S. Army win many of the battles in France that helped the war come to an end. In World War II, there were other languages used as well. During World War II, the Americans were hesitant at first to enter into the war until Japan had attacked us at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. We were losing the war, and the Japanese were able to easily break the codes we would send out, and they knew everything we had sent. It was later found out by a fake message that was sent out and they had attacked there. After we found out that the Japanese could easily read our codes, we had to create a new code that would be very hard to break. So the government turned to the reservations to get recruits to join the Marines, convinced the Navajos speaking their own language would stun even the best Japanese codebreakers. In 1941 and 1942, the Marine Corps started to recruit Navajo Code Talkers. The Navajo Code Talkers were Native American soldiers who helped the United States win World War II. The idea had come from a man named Philip Johnston, who was a missionary son and a World War I veteran who had heard about the success the Choctaw had doing the same thing by telephone. He had been brought up on the Navajo reservation, and he spoke the language known as Diné. To the Navajos, the language was simple and easily understood. To outsiders, however, it would be something that they could not even get the gist of. It is a very complex language to learn. For example, if the commanding officer gave a code talker a message to translate into Navajo, he would speak it into the radio to another code talker, and that receiving code talker would then write the message down in English, and it would be as clear as if the commanding officer had spoken to him directly. If they had said message for Arizona, it meant that they wanted a code talker to receive that message. The Navajo language had the advantage of being naturally complex and virtually unwritten, meaning that the language is not only dependent on accurate pronunciation, but on the tonal emphasis on the word as well, because it can change the whole meaning of the word or sentence if it is not said correctly. Given the past history between the Native Americans and the government, it still was not a surprise for the Navajos to jump right in and help the Americans win the war. One video was interviewing a Navajo code talker, and he said, "I think the Navajo tribe, I think they did the right thing because of how badly they were treated in the past. They were still willing to protect their land. They were willing to protect people that punished them, willing to protect people that conquered them. There is no code talker that would say, 'The heck with that, the heck with the United States, the heck with America.' They're going to say, 'This is my mother, this is my land, this is my everything that I have right here.'" According to a Navajo code talker named Chester Nez, a major in the military took them into a room and told them that they needed to create a code out of their own native language. Then he closed the door to the room and locked it behind him. Nez and everyone else was very confused. He said, "What does he mean by making a code in our own language?" We sat there for about 3 or 4 minutes thinking, how are we going to develop this code? So in addition to the Navajo language being complex and already hard to learn, they had to come up with a code in order to stop the Japanese from decoding their messages. The Navajos would use words like potato in English would be used to describe a hand grenade, and hummingbird in English would mean fighter planes. In addition to those words as well, they would play word games to make it even more confusing and even harder for the words to be cracked. More than 12,000 American Indians served in World War I. About 25% of the male American Indian population at that time. During World War II, when the total American Indian population was less than 350,000, an estimated 44,000 Indian men and women served. It wasn't only the adult Navajos that served, it was teenagers too. Many teenage Navajo code talkers lied about their ages, and as young as 15 went into World War II to protect their people and their land. 420 Navajos served in World War II, and fortunately, many Navajos still speak their language today, and will continue to speak it for future generations. There are over 250,000 Navajo tribal members. As the war continued to progress, and the Navajo Code was adapted, a code talking school had been created as more and more Navajos came in and started learning the codes. Eventually, more than 400 Navajos were recruited as code talkers, those who enlisted and those who were drafted into the war. There were many code talkers from 16 different tribes who served in the Army, the Marines, and the Navy. There were 2 different types of codes, Type 1 codes and Type 2 codes. Type 1 codes were developed by using their language and then creating a secret code with it. Type 2 codes were just messages translated from English into Navajo. For example, send more ammunition to the front would be a Type 2 code. In order to create a Type 1 code, the original first recruited Navajos had to use things that were familiar to them. Chester Nez, one of the first 29 Code Talkers, said in a 2004 interview, "So we start talking about different things, animals, sea creatures, birds, eagles, hawks, and all those domestic animals. Why don't we use those names of different animals, from A to Z? So A, we took a red ant that we live with all the time. B, we took a bear, Yogi the bear. C, a cat. D, a dog. E, an elk. F, fox. G, a goat, and so on down the line." Over to the right is an example of some of the words they used. The letter, the Navajo word, and then the English word. What happens at home after the war? In many Native American cultures and tribes, they believe that after going to war, it affects the soldier's well-being and makes it difficult for him to return to and live his everyday life, upsetting the balance. In order to bring their lives back into balance, the tribes do a special tribal ceremony to make it easy for the soldiers once again to live their lives in peace and be spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically healthy. Not only do the tribe's ceremonies make it easier for them, but many of the soldiers are Christian, so going to church, praying, and going to services help them during their healing process as well. However, in the Navajo way, they have a different way of bringing their soldiers home. When a Navajo soldier returns from war, his family will decide if they can sponsor a ceremony for him. Then they will contact a medicine man, or a spiritual leader, and the medicine man will then talk to the soldier, and then from that decide what kind of ceremony would be the best for the soldier. According to the Navajo Code Talker John Brown Jr., when he had returned from the war, they had a squaw dance, also known as the enemy way ceremony, for him, and all of the bad images of the rotting Japanese, the smell of the dead people, and the blood had all gone away. He said, "And I imagine they killed that evil spirit that was in my mind. That's what it's about. There's a lot of stories there. It takes a long time to talk about it. It usually takes a medicine man to explain everything properly, but it works." Native Americans always honor and respect their veterans. They celebrate and honor them with dances and songs, and many people will go to the veterans because they believe that the veterans will give out good advice because of what they had to endure in the war, and strong mental abilities and many experiences. Depending on the community, the veterans are celebrated a bit differently. For example, at powwows, the veterans will carry their tribe's flags, the American flag and Indian Eagle staff, and other important banners as well, leading in the powwow dancers. This is only one of the lasting traditions to show respect to the veterans and what they have done for their people. After coming home from the war, the Native Americans had a hard time finding jobs. The jobs were scarce, and getting training for a job or education for a job was hard to do. Racism was also very huge and still going on, so it made it even harder for them to find jobs. Even eating and drinking in certain places did not accept the natives, and they did not even get to vote in national or state elections. And although there was the Indian Citizen Act of 1924 that granted full United States citizenship to the Native Americans, some states still refused to let them vote. And it wasn't until 1948 in New Mexico and Arizona, and 1957 in Utah were they allowed to vote. Many natives stayed in their home communities, farming and fishing, ranching, and doing whatever work that they could find. Others were forced to move to different larger urban areas where work was easier to get. Some natives worked to help preserve their languages, artists, educators, and professionals in other kinds of fields too. 40 years later, after Iwo Jima, Pearl Harbor, and the Navajo Code Talkers, in 1982, the then President Ronald Reagan declared that August 14th would be the National Navajo Code Talkers Day. It is still not seen anywhere on any calendar, and many people still cease to know about the Navajo Code Talkers and what they had done for their country. What can we do about it? We can educate people about the Navajo Code Talkers and all of the other Code Talkers out there too, and telling them what they did for us and making a new tradition for generations to come. Celebrate August the 14th in honor of them. On July 26, 2001, 4 Native American men of the original 29 Code Talkers were awarded the highest civilian award U.S. Congress can bestow, putting them on a level with previous distinguished representatives such as George Washington, Jesse Owens, and Robert Kennedy. President Bush told a packed audience in the Capitol building that the 4 Navajo inspired the respect and admiration of all Americans, and that the nation's gratitude was expressed for all time in the medals he was about to give them. The Code Talkers were in the U.S. Marines from 1942 to 1945 in the Pacific. Finally, on July 17, 2014, the governor of Arizona makes August 14th a state holiday. Why should we care? To know about the Code Talkers is a great deal. The Japanese cracked every single message we had sent out. If the Code Talkers hadn't helped, our country would have lost the war. We should care about World War II and the Navajo Code Talkers because it is and always will be a part of history. Also, this is the one time America had treated the Native Americans or indigenous people with respect, not beating them for speaking their language, and going on to their land and killing them off as they once did. The Native Americans, the Navajo Code Talkers, deserve to be remembered and deserve to be honored. If we can celebrate Columbus Day, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, President's Day, Memorial, and Patriot Day, even along with Thanksgiving, then we should honor, respect, and celebrate the Navajo Code Talkers. They deserve that much. My part in getting the National Navajo Code Talkers Day on the national calendar. On July 14, 2014, I started my petition to get the National Navajo Code Talkers Day on the national calendar. Attached to that petition was a 25-minute video I had of me talking about what I had learned about the Navajo Code Talkers. The petition would have been made months before, but I did not know who I would petition to. My final decision was to send it out to the governor of Arizona, the U.S. House of Representatives, and the Colorado State Senate. Before I had started my petition, I created an event page on Facebook and invited all of my family and friends to attend it. Throughout the time of my petition and before that, I posted videos, my petition's progress, and any news that I had heard about the Code Talkers or the Code Talkers Day. My first move after my Facebook event was to post the video I had made on Facebook, my event page to my wall, and then on a page I follow called Our Navajo Code Talkers. The video reviewed what I had learned throughout my research. Apparently, I had not taken screenshots of my petition until I started to really make progress. This screen clipping shows that I had 87 supporters. I need 13 more, and the date is 8/14/2014 at 9:07 a.m., the day of the National Navajo Code Talkers Day. One of my friends shared my petition on her Facebook page after she and her mom both signed my petition. Before Janice Brewer, I was going to petition someone named Brian E. Wilkerson, who is the head of the non-profit organization Spirits of the Sun, and this was near the beginning of the petition. My cousin then signs and shares the petition on her Facebook page as well. This was also at the very beginning of the petition when I first posted it on Facebook. Another friend, after signing it, shares the petition as well after asking me how many more I needed. He again shared his own post and put a more forward approach on it that I appreciated. I think he really helped me get even more signatures that I needed. Finally, at 5:12 p.m. on August 14th, 2014, I had 95 supporters, with only 5 more to go. Then, my other cousin signed it, and she shared it as well, probably helping me out the most near the end. Finally, at 10:05 p.m. on August 14th, I reached 101 signatures. I only needed 99 more to go until 200. I had 112 supporters and counting at 10:07 a.m. on August 15th, 2014, but I had decided to call victory with 114 signatures. I have heard no news yet about my petition, but I do hope it gets on the national calendar once and for all. They really truly deserve it. If not, then I'll start another petition and I won't stop until it gets on the national calendar. And that is what I learned about the Navajo Code Talkers, their part in World War II, the Native or Indigenous people's history, the National Navajo Code Talkers Day, and that is what I did about it. Thank you to those who signed and shared.